On today's show, how will this season impact the future of Brooklyn Sophomores? Was drafting 5 rookies in 2025 a mistake? What trade packages could the Nets receive for MPJ? I'll answer all those fan questions and more on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets. I'm Erik Slater. On today's episode, it's Fan Take Friday, part 3 of this week's mailbag episode. Got a lot of submissions, so thank you to everyone who put questions on Twitter. Got a lot of emails, got some DMs. So rolling on through your remaining takes and questions, let's get right into it. First one, if players like Saraf, Wolf, and Powell can't crack the rotation this season, what path do they have to getting playing time in 2027-28, where we'll presumably be trying to push even harder to compete for the playoffs? That's from Rick W. And yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that that's a really valid question, given the fact that I've spoken at length about the minutes crunch that the Nets are going to face this season. So I do think that it's going to be tough for some of these guys to get minutes. And you look at the Nets sophomore class, or the guys I would be looking at specifically in that regard, obviously outside of Yegor Dioman and probably Nolan Traore too. Like, I think Traore is probably a safe bet to get minutes throughout this season. But yeah, like Saraf, Wolf, and Powell, you look at Saraf and Powell, like there's a lot of guys in the backcourt that are going to be getting minutes or have a strong case for minutes. When you talk about Yegor and Michael being the starters, and then you look beyond that, I just said that Nolan Traore, I think, is going to get minutes. And then it's going to be tough for the Nets to bury Keon Ellis on the bench after signing him in free agency. It's going to be tough for them to bury Terrence Mann, who's a veteran. You probably don't want to do that to him. So where does that leave Ben Saraf and Drake Powell? Like, I think that they could be guys who get G League minutes early in the season. I think as the year progresses, maybe there will be nights where Keon Ellis or Terrence Mann get the night off, and then Saraf and Powell need to play. But like, they're going to have to earn it at a certain point. The same thing goes for Danny Wolf. Like, you look at the front court, the Nets obviously brought in Julius Randle to start. They still have Michael Porter Jr. at this point. And then beyond that, you do have, Noah Clowney, who you would think is going to get minutes. They drafted Joshua Jefferson. They have Josh Minot. Like, there's going to be competition for minutes there. So all of these guys, I think, are going to face, somewhat of an uphill battle to, secure like a consistent and night-to-night role in the Nets rotation. And as I said, at a certain point, like, they're going to have to earn it. Like, the Nets aren't tanking this season. In my last part 2 of this Fan Take Friday episode, I got questions about how much are they going to prioritize going for wins versus prioritize youth and trying to get some of those guys minutes and develop and evaluate them. And like, that's a tightrope that they're going to have to walk. But at a certain point, if it's pretty clear that, Ben Saraf or Drake Powell or Danny Wolf aren't giving the Nets the best chance to win compared to some of the veterans or some of the other guys that they have, it's going to be tough for the Nets to justify continuing to give those guys minutes if they're not the best players and they're not the most deserving of it, because that kind of undercuts some of what Jordi Fernandez's core principles have been of, like, you need to earn your minutes. You need to try to put your best foot forward. You need to, be worthy of getting this kind of playing time. And if they aren't, and you're benching some veterans at their expense, those veterans are going to start looking around and saying, what's going on here? What are we doing? Like, why am I not getting minutes? Why are we not playing the best guys? So all that to say, like, Saraf, Wolf, and Powell, they're going to have to earn their minutes this coming season. And if they can't earn their minutes this coming season, that's going to put them in a position where, you have a 3rd-year option on these guys, and we know that, like, that's not guaranteed. Like, we saw it with Dariq Whitehead. Like, the Nets declined his 3rd-year option. They cut him loose, and they can do that with any of these guys, especially given the fact that they're going to be pushing the gas pedal. Like, Dariq Whitehead got cut in a year where the Nets are going to be tanking, which, obviously says something about him, but also, like, you just juxtapose that to 2027-28, where I think the Nets are going to be hitting the go button. I think that Sean Marks is going to have at least some pressure under him to try to make a play-in or playoff push during that season. If Saraf, Wolf, and Powell can't crack the rotation this year, are they going to be back in 2027-28, and are the Nets going to be giving them minutes just for the sake of giving them minutes for optics because they're first-round picks? I don't think so. So, to say, like, if they can't crack the rotation this season, I think it's going to be really hard for them to get minutes in 2027-28. And look, maybe that goes more for a guy like Danny Wolf, who's older and you would think has a little bit less of a trend line for development in terms of, where he's at in his basketball journey. But I do think it goes for all of them. Like Drake Powell struggled in a very significant way at this year's summer league. If he just looks really bad this season and he's not showing, promise as an offensive prospect in terms of being a floor spacer, in terms of a guy who can do some stuff off the dribble, maybe you just have to cut bait and you just have to say, like, look, that was the 22nd pick in the draft. It doesn't always work out. Same thing with Ben Surratt. Like, I think he has some intriguing tools to his game as a, 6'6" ball handler who has really good, I think, advantage creation ability. But if the jump shot still looks broken, if it doesn't look like it's going to get to a point where it could even approach levels of respectability, if the lack of athleticism is holding him back a lot, maybe you need to cut bait and just say it's the 26th pick in the draft. And, the same kind of things can go for Danny Wolf. So it's going to be a really important season for those three guys. And you could throw Nolan Shore into that bucket too, to see, how do they develop? How can they get into this Nets rotation? How can they really convince Sean Marks that they should be part of this rebuild moving forward? Next question on that note, looking back now, was it a critical mistake for the Nets to draft 5 rookies in the first round in 2025? And based on the mountains of picks the Nets own in the upcoming 2 drafts, will they be forced to either move off some of these younger players before they maybe want to at this next trade deadline for future assets? There simply are not enough roster spots for this many young players while also trying to get better. That's from JB. And yeah, like that's a good way to put it. Like when you're trying to be a competitive team, like it's fine when you're in a rebuild, when you're in tanking seasons, when you're trying to be a competitive team and you probably look at 2027, 28, the Nets probably trying to make a play-in or a playoff push during that season. You can't roster, 9, 10 first, second, third year players. Like it's not a way that you can compete. So, was it a mistake for the Nets to draft 5 rookies, first round picks? It's tough to say. I think the way I would put it is it wasn't ideal. I don't think it's necessarily what the Nets wanted to do. I think they probably wanted to try to move off of some of those picks for future assets. They maybe wanted to try to package some of those picks to move up. Neither of those things came to fruition. And maybe they did get caught holding the bag a little bit. And that is tough because, I spoke about it at the time when they made those 5 first-round picks, and I've spoken about it continuously since. It's really tough to get a proper evaluation of these players when you have this many young guys. And they make 5 in 2025. They make 3 this coming season. They trade for a guy like Josh Minott. They still have, Day'Ron Sharpe and Noah Clowney. Like there's just a lot of young guys on this roster, 11 guys age 24 or younger, and there's not unlimited minutes to go around. So I think the Nets are going to do their best to try to get these guys minutes, to try to get them experience, to try to get a proper evaluation of them. But it's not an ideal circumstance in that regard. And I think that it's something that might put a little bit of stress on Jordi Fernandez. I think the Nets will try to use Long Island as a tool. Like, I think from their perspective, they probably think that guys like guys like Ben Surratt and Drake Powell, and you could throw Joshua Jefferson in there, who's 23 years old, that they can play those guys in the G League during the first half or early in this coming season, and they can use that as an evaluation tool. Like those guys don't necessarily have to only be evaluated, during NBA minutes, but you do want to get them NBA minutes because that is the best data and the best sample size to get evaluations on them. So, was it a critical mistake for the Nets to draft 5 rookies? I think that might be a little strong, but I would say that it was less than ideal. And, look, you could say from the perspective of if they made the 5 first-round picks and if, 3 of those guys looked amazing, you would say it wasn't a mistake. And look, it's too early to rule these guys out. So I think it made things difficult is what I would say. And I think that you're going to see some of those difficulties this coming season with how the rotation has to play on a nightly basis and how many guys Jordi Fernandez is going to be trying to get minutes for. So that's what I would say about that. Got one more question about Michael Porter Jr., potential trade scenarios, how the Nets could approach that this coming season. So I'll get into all of that when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep. Now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. Guys, there's a lot of fun baseball happening right now. The Yankees nipping at the heels of the Tampa Bay Rays in that AL East division race. They're going to need a lot of offense down the stretch in order to catch them. Ben Rice, Jazz Chisholm, George Lombard, any of those guys, you can make your free pick on which of them can go yard with daily dingers. So you're ready to play your game today. Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of the MLB. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of managing software. Guys, the best organizations know that success isn't just about talent. It's about having everyone working towards the same goal, and that's true in sports just like it is in business. Guys, look at any of the NBA teams that have had success, have built championship rosters, championship rotations out. They all had everybody on the same page. Everybody knew the goal. Everybody was willing to accept their role, and those roles were easily communicated by the management, by the higher ups. And one thing that really stands out about how those organizations get everyone pulling in the same direction is it wasn't just one great player or coach. It was a coordinated effort across the entire organization that made it successful. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try it for free at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon. All right, coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, part 3 of this week's Fan Take Friday edition. Last question. Looking at potential trade packages for MPJ, do you see Brooklyn possibly getting a younger roster upgrade like a Franz Wagner or Trey Murphy that fits the timeline better? Or do you see Marks moving him for just role guys and draft capital? That's from John. And this is going to be one of the biggest questions of the Nets season. And I've gotten a ton of questions. I did part 1. I talked about, could the Nets be a play-in team? Some people think that they could push up towards 40 wins. What are the possibilities of that happening? I did an episode recently with Lucas Kaplan talking about their over-under at 24.5. Can they exceed that by a good amount? And, it's tough to answer that with Michael Porter Jr.'s future being as up in the air as it is, because he is a top 2 player on this Nets team. And he is, the only veteran alongside, Julius Randle, who you would say is approaching a star level player. And his future is very uncertain. Like the Nets were, it's August, late August 20s, and the Nets have not agreed to a contract extension with him. I haven't heard anything about it trending in that direction. So with that, there's going to be a lot of questions about, is he traded before this season? Is he traded at the deadline? And I think that right now, that I would say that is definitely the most likely scenario, that he isn't on this team after the trade deadline. So, that's going to bring in the question in a season when the Nets are trying to be more competitive and win more games. What does a trade package for MPJ look like? And there's kind of, 2 directions that you think maybe they can go with it, which is they could trade MPJ for future assets and salary fillers, or they could package some stuff maybe with MPJ and try to get an upgrade. And Franz Wagner and Trey Murphy are 2 guys that I've spoken about in the past. Like, Wagner is the more interesting player, I think, or the more realistic player in that regard, just because, like, the Pelicans are also a rebuilding team. So why are they trading Trey Murphy for, an older guy at Trey Murphy's position? Like, I don't really think that makes sense. Look, the Pelicans do a lot of things that don't make any sense, so I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't really think that makes, I don't see them trading Trey Murphy for an older version, or not, one-to-one version, but an older player at his position. But the Franz Wagner thing, I've spoken about that, previously with some people. And I do think that is somewhat interesting, because you look at the Magic, they're getting pretty expensive. They have Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner there. And you would think eventually they're going to have to break those 2 guys up. Like, those 2 guys are not optimal complements to one another. And with that, Franz Wagner, is he the more likely of those 2 guys that could be traded? I think that there's a decent argument you could make, yes, just because, you look at Paolo Banchero, like, he was the number 1 pick. You could argue that maybe he has the higher upside of the two. You could argue maybe that Franz Wagner could be a player that could maybe net them some more in trades just based on the contracts. And then you could get those assets alongside him. You get whatever player you get alongside him, and you could try to build around Paolo and unlock Paolo's game a little bit more. And maybe they could convince themselves in their head, we're not seeing the best version of Paolo with Franz as his co-star. And we think that he has a higher ceiling if we can get him a more, ideal supporting cast. So that's the scenario. And Franz Wagner, I think he's definitely a player that I could see the Nets trying to take a swing on. They just signed his brother. We know that Franz and Mo are very, very close. We know that they both like to spend time in New York City. So I definitely think that it's possible. Do I think that it's likely this season? No. If I had to guess right now, if the Nets do an NPJ trade, which I said I think is somewhat likely, I would predict that it's probably in the other direction where the Nets are getting a future asset for him. Maybe they get some kind of a younger player as a salary filler who they have some interest in. But I think that that's the more likely scenario. But look, a lot of it's going to depend on how the season plays out. Like if they hold MPJ to the trade deadline, you look at the Magic, maybe if they're struggling, maybe if Franz and Paolo continue to not look good alongside one another, maybe if they need a lot more shooting, they could say, look, we could get MPJ and we could get maybe a couple of assets for Franz. This fits our team better. This gives us some more optionality moving forward. That makes sense. So look, I wouldn't say that it's out of the cards. I wouldn't say it's out of the equation. Franz Wagner, when you talk about, like I've spoke on a recent episode about, there's potential the Nets could be a buyer at the trade deadline, that they could try to make an aggressive move to make themselves better, provided that player fits their long-term timeline. And when you talk about what players potentially, are in the realm of possibilities of, them being targets for them in that regard, Franz Wagner is one of the top guys who I would say that you could have your eye on, and who there is at least a scenario where you could talk yourself into where that could make some sense for both sides, for the Magic and for the Nets. So that's how I see that. But right now, I think that it's probably more likely that if the Nets make a midseason trade with Michael Porter Jr., that they're getting a future asset. Maybe they get a player who's somewhat interesting. And look, that'll hurt them in the short term, but maybe they can spin those assets, packaged with some other stuff into that Franz Wagner type of trade down the line whenever that kind of player becomes available. So that's how I see that. That's all I got for you guys on today's episode of Locked On Nets, part 3 of this week's Fan Take Friday edition. Once again, thank you to all of you who submit questions on Twitter, reply, DM me, who submit emails, asking questions or giving takes. I appreciate it. I have a lot of fun doing these mailbag episodes. I haven't done one in a little bit, so good to get on here and do that. But if you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy my content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. We got a lot more coverage of things coming up as we approach Nets training camp. Got some players to talk about, got some potential rotation things to talk about. So I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.